I guess this begs the question, if he doesn't act, or he acts in a limited way, where does that leave us? Or what does that leave the people of Iran, more to the point?
Well, on the question of Trump, there's a lot of talk in Washington over the last few days among foreign policy experts and foreign diplomats about 2013. That was when President Barack Obama didn't enforce his red line on Syria over the use of chemical weapons. Trump has now at least 5, 6, 7, 8 occasions, depending on you count and how you count, said to Iran that if you crack down on protesters, I'm going to act militarily. So he's almost talked himself into a corner. And the question then becomes whether, if he doesn't do some kind of military action, the authorities in Iran will feel they're getting a free pass from the US president and may become even more vicious in their crackdown. The problem, however, is when you start talking about presidents taking military action, sending Americans into combat with all the civilian casualties and consequences that can have, you're getting into quite dangerous territory, because then you're talking about how a president must back up his words rather than what the objective of the strikes might be in each case.
Yeah, I mean, the objective, I think, is pretty clear. I mean, he's been quite emphatic about this. He says it would be to help protesters on the ground. The question is that what would happen? Or could limited strikes or targeted strikes actually make things worse? These are the questions that are out there at this point, as we continue to wait to find out what his decision is.
Yeah, and that's right. There is a big debate going on here about whether, okay, if you do the kind of targeted strikes that Trump has shown he likes, the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities last year, the lightning strike to take President Nicolas Maduro out of Venezuela, is that A, feasible in the Iranian scenario, and B, would it actually play into all of these demands, which US policymakers are very careful about, this conceit that Iran has that the protests to start with are an American plot, and that would give them the pretext to unleash even more repression. That's always in the back of minds in Washington when they're talking about especially strikes on Iran. And then you get to the practical nature of this. Could airstrikes using missiles, drones, etc., could that really make a difference? Even if you take out, say, IGRC hardware and facilities or communications, does that really make a difference when you're talking about Iranian internal security forces on the streets shooting people at point blank range? Does that really help the situation? So I think there are sort of philosophical and practical issues here that even as Trump seems to be moving inexorably towards some kind of military action.
And you write this, quote, the situation in Iran is deeply complex, and it is. And you say he can't just bomb Iran into a democracy or bombard Iran into a democracy. And I guess that begs the question, is there a meaningful option between doing nothing and launching airstrikes? And again, you know, there will be much discussion about this, I'm sure, in Washington, amongst those that you speak to. The point about this Trump administration is pretty much nobody knows, apart from those very few people around him, actually what his thinking is.
That's right. And I think a lot of this has been caused, as it often is, by Donald Trump speaking publicly and saying things that officials are then racing to catch up with and work out what the implications are. One of the big issues in Iran would be if you manage to, for instance, topple the clerical regime, would that what would happen next? Would that open a path towards a democratic counter-revolution in Iran? Would you then push the country conversely into the arms of some kind of more secular strongman where the repression would be so great? There's so much, the IGRC is so embedded in society. It's got a lot to lose economically, apart from everything else. If the regime were to fail, could you cause some kind of collapse of the governing structure? You saw what happened in Venezuela, where the administration took out Maduro, but it has kept in place that repressive machinery that is the government, just because it's worried about that exact kind of collapse that happened in Iraq. So many unanswered questions here about Iran.